Hello, and welcome to this very safe and very cozy chess lesson that we're gonna have today. I want you to feel completely safe and just relax and enjoy as we're gonna learn a new opening with the black pieces. But are you happy to be here? Do you feel good? Yay, I'm so happy to hear that. I'm very happy that you had time to meet with me to do this chess lesson. And before we get started, I just want to make sure that you feel comfortable and that you know that for this chess lesson, there will be no wrong questions, no stupid questions. We're here to learn, we're here to have a good time, and of course learn a little bit about chess as well. And the opening that we're going to look at today is one of my all-time favorites, and I think it might become one of your favorites as well. It's an opening that you can play with the black pieces, and what's so funny about this particular opening is that it's one of the few openings where black actually gets a chance to attack very early on. And I know that you like to attack when you play chess. Ready? Okay, you're ready. Great. Okay, let's get started. So, yes, we can just adjust the pieces a little bit, make sure that they're ready to learn as well. Oh, like this. Okay. So the opening you're gonna learn today is a response to this move. This is one of the most common moves you'll find in chess. Do you know what other move is one of the most normal ones you meet? Not so sure? Yeah, you got it. Exactly. Pawn to e4 and pawn to d4, moving either the pawn in front of the king or the pawn in front of the queen. Both playing here in the center of the board. Now, I don't even think I have mentioned the name of the opening, have I? No. The opening we're going to learn today is called the King's Indian Defense. And the first move that black plays here is to put out this knight. Where do you think it should go? Here or here? 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 This one? Yeah, exactly. Of course, we put the knight here. This is a better square for the knight because it controls the center. It looks at these two squares. And now it won't be possible for white to push this pawn as you're simply gonna capture it. Very good. Okay. So since white cannot push this pawn, they might try for this. This is the most common move. And now we have several moves for black, but the King's Indian is all about rapid development and getting to castle very early on. Do you have any ideas how to develop this bishop? Yes, that is actually a very, very good move. It is more common than the one we're going to look at today. This is called the Nimzo Indian, and it's one of the safest and most sound openings black can play. So that's an excellent move. Do you have any other ways we could develop the bishop? Yes, exactly. Very good. Yes, exactly. And I'm so happy that you point to this square because this is, of course, the better square for the bishop. If it went here, it might be captured later. Okay, so white will also develop their pieces, maybe go here with the knight. And I know that you had a good idea. Do you want to play it? Yes, bishop g7. And do you see what you're ready to do next move? Yes, of course, make a castle. Castling is often a very good idea to do in the opening. Okay, however, if we look a little bit here, we can see that black really hasn't crossed the 6th rank yet. And white might try to take advantage of this and grab even more space here in the middle of the board. This is not dangerous, but oh, you want to capture it? Maybe yes, this pawn is under attack, but white did play a preparing move before they pushed this pawn. Do you see which piece is defending this one? Yes, this is why white is going to go here with the knight first, and then only then push their pawn in front of the king. So taking the pawn now is a little bit dangerous because the knight will be lost. And white is actually threatening to push this knight with this pawn move. So do you have any ideas how you can stop this pawn move? Yeah, yes, very good. You go here, and now exactly if white goes here, you will be able to capture. Let's take a look and just see how this could play out. So I go here, and yes, yeah, exactly, very good. And then of course white can capture back with an attack here, but do you have to move the knight, or can you find another good move? You could castle, maybe, but then the knight would be under attack. Oh, now you're getting somewhere. Yes. 100%. You capture the queen with a check. White can now capture with the king, or capture with the knight, but in either case, black is doing just fine. Maybe I will capture like this to still have the right to castle, but you can see that all the pieces now are on the first rank, and you have developed 2 pieces. Yeah, true, the knight is under attack, but you could play something like this and attack the pawn, or even go there, or even go here. Black has several good moves to choose from and is doing absolutely fine. So let's go back a little bit. You can get this one. So this is why your idea about going pawn to d6 is such a good idea. It really prevents white from going here. So instead, white will probably continue their development going here with the other knight. And now you're ready to make the move that you had in mind just a few moments ago. Yeah, absolutely. You're doing very great, completely understanding the essence of quick development, which is so important in chess. And already I kind of like black's position. I so enjoy this bishop here on g7, and the king will be very safe here in the corner. That is one of the things that I like about the King's Indian, that black's king is very safe because it's so well protected by both pawns and pieces. White hasn't castled yet, so I might try to do that by developing this bishop in order to go here and make castle next move. And this is the time to play the first typical pawn break in the King's Indian defense. And when I say a pawn break, it maybe sounds a little bit mysterious, but I can tell you that if you just make a pawn move, it could be something like going here or here. A pawn break is a pawn move that challenges one of the opponent's pawns. So do you see how you can make a pawn break in this position? Challenge one of white's pawns. Yes, that is a pawn break. That is also a pawn break. That one as well. You're very good at finding pawn breaks. Yes, doing very great. Any of them you like more than others? These two, yes, very good. And those two, going with the c pawn 2 squares up, or going with the e pawn here, those are the two typical pawn breaks in the King's Indian. And the most typical one is this one, going to e5. Good job. But maybe you're wondering about something. Is there anything you might be worried about white can do now? Yes. And that is a very valid concern, that this pawn is actually under attack from 2 pieces, and it's only defended 1 time. However, this is completely harmless, and black is doing just fine in case that happens. But let's see what it would look like. I capture here, and do you see how you can capture back? Yes. Very good. Now we're opening up for the file with the queens here on d1 and d8. And one of the players might exchange the queens, like so. So black just lost a queen, but it's very temporary, because what can black of course play? Yes? Yeah, you got it. Winning back the queen. And now if white insists to win a pawn here, it's only going to be a very temporary gain. But this does involve a little bit of tactical vision. So take your time and see if you can find any way to gain back the pawn. And let me know if you need a little bit of a hint, because it is a little bit difficult, especially if you haven't seen it before. But just know that you're doing good in this position. And you can take all the time you need. Oh, you were very quick to spot that one. Yes. True, you could capture here, but white could capture back. But then in that position, you have a really great move. Maybe that was actually also going to work, but there's something even more direct. The fianchetto bishop. Down here, that's what we call a bishop, like this. Yes, and you can take back. Great. You capture, I capture, and bam. And you win back the pawn with a slightly better position. Why do you think that this is a little bit better for black? The king is castled. Yes, that's a very good thing. The king is castled and safe. Not so sure. Yes, very true. This rook is on an open file, controlling lots of squares. And, okay, white is in no real trouble either, but this is a very nice position to have reached with the black pieces. So let's go back a little bit. Do you remember where the pieces were? Yes. And this knight was here. Almost. This knight wasn't quite here. Oh, yeah, then you could capture my queen. Yes, that would be even better. True. It was an f6, exactly. And do you remember the move that black could then play in this position? The pawn break? Yes, exactly. And we just took a look at what would happen if white captured, and we found out that this was perfectly fine for black. So instead, white will probably castle, also trying to get their king into safety. in the corner, but this king is not going to be nearly as safe as your king down here. Now it is black to move, and there are several moves to choose from. So do you have any ideas? Yes, you could capture that pawn, absolutely. Yeah, developing a knight is a good move, and it's actually the theoretical move, meaning that this is the move that all the masters prefer to play. So you're thinking just like a chess master, and that, of course, deserves one of these. But white, of course, could now take the opportunity to play this move, kicking the knight and gaining more space in the middle of the board. However, this is no problem for black because this knight really wants to join the kingside forces. So how can you get the knight closer to the kingside? That is actually getting closer to the kingside. That is true. White might then capture, and you could of course capture back, but then maybe the queen would end up capturing. It's a little bit unclear. So there is a better square for the knight. Yes, very good. The knight stands perfectly here on e7, and it's ready to jump to some of the squares over here, and eventually, sometime in the future, be part of an attack against the white king. Let's look a little bit at this position, because both players have now castled and gotten out most of their minor pieces. These two knights have been developed along with this bishop, and same for white. So we should talk a little bit about the strategies for both players. And I want you to take a look at the pawns here. This is what we call a pawn chain. And do you notice anything about this pawn chain? They are controlling a lot of dark squares, and yes, actually, this bishop may be a little bit sad for the moment because it's kind of blocked by these pawns. However, the bishop is doing, it's not a super active bishop, but it is a very important defensive piece, and later on it can become very active. Another thing that I want you to notice about this pawn chain, is the direction of the pawn chain. Have you heard about this before? I think you have, because you're showing the completely right gesture here. You're saying that the pawn chain is pointing in this direction. This means that black should seek their play on the king side, over here. If we take a look at white's pawns, it's a little bit harder to tell because we can't really say that this pawn chain is pointing in either direction. But most of the time, white will do the opposite and focus on the queen side. Very often they will try to eventually push this pawn here to challenge the pawn chain that you have got here on the dark squares. A way to do this could be to push the pawn to b4. It could also be to support it with a knight, going knight here and here to get an extra defender on this square. And I believe that the most common move here is to simply push the pawn. Now, we talked a little bit about that black wants to play on the king side. But what would that even look like? Of course, the bishop here might be able to go down here and make a pin on the knight. But what we're really looking for is a pawn storm on the king side. We're looking for a very aggressive attack. So how could we initiate a pawn storm on the king side? Yes, one of the ways would be to simply go forward with Harry the H pawn, going up here to the board and see if we can get in connection with these white pawns in front of the white king. But the pawn here is maybe a little bit alone, and we need to be able to utilize these pawns as well. So how could we, but you definitely need to save this move for later. This pawn move will eventually come. Yes, this is exactly, so you were considering to go here, but you don't like that white can capture immediately. That leaves you with this pawn exactly. True, so this pawn right now is blocked by the knight. If this knight was gone, you could push the pawn up here, and that is the typical King's Indian plan. And therefore the solution is to simply move the knight. Where to though? He's looking around. Where should it go? Maybe here, but maybe then it will be kicked. Knight h5 is a good option, definitely possible. Yes, to look at that square. Knight d7 is a perfectly good option as well. And even I really like your knight here. And I like the last place that you put it, next to the queen. Yes, snug as a bug between the rook and the queen. Maybe you think that it looks a little bit weird to go back with the knight like this. Yeah, maybe it does look a little bit weird, but I promise you that this knight is going to become very active a little bit later, because as soon as you have pushed the pawn to f5, the knight can jump back and join the battle once again. So white, of course, had their own plan going on over here, and will continue with a move like c5 and trying to undermine this pawn chain. But no need to worry about this. You have your own plan, and I think you have the move that you want to play ready. Yes, 100%. It is very well defended. Defended 4 times. Good job. Okay. Now white has a few different ways to react. One of them is to capture this pawn. And as you just mentioned, you have it protected so many times, but this also leaves you with a little bit of a dilemma. How should you capture back? Yeah, maybe that's definitely an option. And it would activate the knight. You could capture with the bishop, developing that piece as well. Taking with the rook is definitely also worth considering. And what about the final way to capture? Yes. And this one is actually the best one. You look worried about your king down here. No need to worry, he's still very, very safe here in the corner. Because even though the pawn shield is kind of broken up, he has a lot of pieces here to defend him. The knight here in e8 can jump to here to f6. The other knight can jump here, and there are no white pieces attacking the king. So he's being very safe here. Yes, he's very happy and satisfied with all of his protection. And these two pawns, they're really grabbing a whole lot of squares here in the middle of the board. Black might be able to push this pawn or this pawn, and this is actually a very good position for black. And though it may not look like it, this king is much more vulnerable than your king is. So that would be the very best way to capture back in case white captures on f5. with the pawn. Exactly. Good job. So instead, white might want to move this knight, because black is maybe looking to capture here, or even going further, pushing this pawn here and grabbing a lot of space. And just as you need your knights on the king side to initiate the attack, white wants their knights over here in order to help attack your pawn chain. So after knight d2, maybe it's time to bring one of your pieces back. One of your pieces that kind of got a little bit passive can now become active again. Yes. Where should he go? Only with one square. Yes. The knight here jumps back to f6 where it came from, but now it's no longer blocking the f-pawn. And this, of course, adds another attacker on the e4 square. So white will most often defend this an extra time, trying to solidify their center here. And black now has to ask herself if this pawn should be captured or if they should play something else. Do you have any ideas here about? And remember that we want to make a pawn storm. Yes, still pointing in that direction. Oh, maybe something about this pawn, maybe something about that pawn. Yes, very good. This is the very best move, and we can see that the pawn chain here just grew one pawn stronger, and now you're ready to push these pawns further up the board and attack this king, this poor white king. And I think this is all the theory that we need to know for now. And I wanted to show you a game because one of the most famous chess player in the world, Garry Kasparov, do you know him? Yes, you know him. One of the strongest chess players to ever live. He really enjoyed playing the King's Indian with the black pieces. So let's take a look at a game he played from 1990. He played against a grandmaster called Piquet with the white pieces. So Piquet pushed his pawn to d4, and what do you think the great Kasparov played? Yes, 100%. Good job. Now, Piquet here, he didn't push this pawn immediately. He first developed his knight. But this doesn't really change anything. We can still continue with our King's Indian setup. Very good. You're getting ready to get your bishop out. Super. Now Piquet pushed his pawn, and we can see that it kind of transposes into the line that we looked at before. Great. Perfect. You're playing just like Kasparov so far. Yeah, it's a good thing to do. Okay. Piquet here developed his other knight, and what do you think Kasparov did? Yeah, you're considering two very good moves. This could definitely be played already now. But he played something else. Yes, he castled. And the reason that he castled first is that in the King's Indian, black typically only pushes d6 when white is threatening to push a pawn to e5 here to attack this knight. So now when Piquet pushed his pawn to e4, you already know what black should play. Exactly. Getting control over this e5 square. Piquet moved his bishop, got ready to castle, And what did the great Garry Kasparov play with the black pieces now? Yes, very good. You remember everything that I told you. I'm very proud. He, of course, pushed the pawn to e5 and Piquet castled kingside. Now, what should black play? Take all the time that you need, and there are several good moves, so no wrong answers, but there is one answer we're looking for in particular when playing the King's Indian. And where should it go? Yeah. Great. That is the very best move. However, I want to tell you that some players, they actually prefer to get the knight here to d7 because it's also getting closer to the king's side. But you're right that if the knight stands here, it is kind of blocking this bishop, so I really prefer this move. And who else do you think preferred this move? You did, and Kasparov did, of course, the player with the black pieces. So his opponent now pushed the pawn, and Kasparov had a great way to deal with this. Yes, putting the knight on e7, looking to later on get it involved in a kingside attack. Now, if you remember, we talked about a lot of things, so maybe it's hard to remember everything. But do you remember what pawn move white often wanted to make in the King's Indian? Maybe something over here? Yes, this pawn move. It cannot be made right now exactly because black is ready to capture, but white here played a move that looked to gain control over this square. Do you see any ways that this can be done? Yes, that would be a way. Very good. Any other ways? b4. That is the move that we looked at before. Immediately getting another piece to defend the c5 square. Now Piquet here, he played instead knight e1. Looks a little bit weird, but do you see where the knight might be going next turn? Or sometime in the future? Yes, the knight could go here, getting another piece to control c5. Now Kasparov, what pawn move does he want to make? Yes, f pawn wants to move 2 squares up because this is the direction that the pawn chain is pointing towards. But right now the knight is blocking. And do you remember the move that we looked at before? Yes, you put the knight next to the queen. However, Kasparov, he preferred to put it elsewhere, but still very close to the black queen. So where might that be? True. Still keeping close to the black majesty. And of course, getting ready to push this pawn. Now Piquet played a move that you suggested before. Went with his bishop to e3, controlling this c5 square. And Kasparov, he's still, that's one of the good points. That's absolutely true. That the knight here on d7 in front of the black queen is also eyeing this square, making it a little bit more difficult for white to push this pawn, even after this move. Black now continued his plan on the king side. So what do you think he played? Yeah. 1 or 2 squares? 2 squares, of course. Good job. Great. Piqué protected the pawn on e4 with his pawn on f3, and we are just about reaching the position almost that we got to when analyzing the opening. But do you remember if this pawn should capture or if it should do something else? Don't want to capture? Yes. We want to push it instead so that we can continue the pawn storm with these 2 pawns afterwards. This is of course attacking the bishop, and the bishop doesn't have a whole lot of squares because, as you mentioned, this beautiful pawn chain is attacking all of these squares. So it went back to f2, still keeping an eye on the c5 square. And now you need to think like Kasparov. Be a little bit fearless and initiate. We already initiated, but continuing the pawn storm on the king side. Yes, one of these 2 pawns should move, and I believe that you can start with either of them, but yes, you're just in sync with Garry Kasparov here. You're playing very good moves. g5 was played, and Piqué here pushed his pawn over here, staying true to his plan on pushing c5. Okay, now it's Gary's turn to move, and he does have several ways to continue the pawn storm. But do you remember the knights here? They kind of went out of the way to not block the pawn storm, but they should at some point get back. Yes. This is one of the very good moves in the positions, and he will play that next move. Yes. First, he puts this knight back to where it came from, and then next move you will already know what that is, because Piqué now got to push c5, but Garry Kasparov didn't care so much about this. He continued over here. Yes. And one could say that the King's Indian is really more of an opening with the knights than the bishops. We can see that the knights have been moved more times, and they often serve a more important role in the attack, alongside with these pawns, of course. Now Piqué captured on d6, trying to destroy your beautiful pawn chain. How should you capture back? And this is a little bit tactical, so take all the time you need. You're worried about something? Show me what you're worried about. You have spotted that the queen and the rook are on the same diagonal, and yes, you're in great tactical form. This, of course, would be very good for white because it would attack the queen, and if the queen moves, then capture the rook on f8 next to the king. So, how should you then capture back on d6? Yes, excellent. And also, now you still have this lovely pawn chain pointing towards the king's side. Piqué put his rook on c1. This move might be a little bit tricky to understand. Why would he play something like this? Do you have any ideas? What is the point of going here with the rook? True. It's placing the rook on an open file, and it's actually looking to put the knight here on b5 and looking a little bit at this square here on c7. maybe going here with a knight, maybe even a rook, and this could become a little bit uncomfortable for black. So Kasparov here decided to play a move that kind of prevents this plan for white. And it's a little bit tricky. Yeah, because maybe then you could push the pawn here. Is that what you had in mind? Very good. However, it does weaken the dark squares a little bit, so maybe Piquet could then play something like this to eye the square white here. So he played another move, and it's a very difficult move to find if you haven't seen it before, but I can tell you that it is a rook move. Are you getting an idea? Yes, exactly. Rook f7 was played, controlling this square with the rook, and actually there are more points to this move, because the rook on f7 frees up a certain square. Do you see what square I'm talking about? Yes. And why would the f8 square be relevant to free up? Which piece might be interested in going there? Exactly. The bishop can sometimes go to f8. That's a very typical motive in the King's Indian, that the rook and the bishop, they kind of exchange place. Because now the bishop would be able to defend this pawn on d6. This can become a very weak point in black's camp. And even the rook can then go sometimes to g7 and attack in the g file. So this is why rook f7 is such a multi-purpose move. You're thinking about going here with the queen? Yeah, if the f-file opens up, then maybe even the queen could go to f8 to assert pressure in the f-file. Okay, white now played here, very typical for white to play on the queen side. And now I talked a little bit about what move black might be interested in playing. Yes, bishop f8. Looks a little bit funny, but it's really, this bishop, we should see it as a very defensive piece in this opening, looking to protect both the king and sometimes this weak pawn on d6. Piquet continued with his play here on the queen side, and this pawn move is a little bit tricky. It's actually looking to go here with the knight to attack the pawn on a7. Looks a little bit funny, but if white would be able to win this pawn and have 2 against 1, that might convert into a passed pawn, which could become very dangerous. So Kasparov now tried to prevent, or at least prepare what to do in case a knight landed on this square. Yes, that is absolutely possible, but it does weaken something. Yes, it does weaken this square, and the bishop could go here immediately, or maybe, as you pointed out, the knight could jump in here. Yes, very good. Now Piquet still put his knight here on b5, and though it was possible for Gary to capture this knight, he actually didn't even do that. He had something else in mind, and maybe you can see that it's really over here he's focusing his army. So how can you continue? Yes, you see now the value of the bishop on f8 protecting the pawn on d6. Yes, one of these pawns should definitely move. Oftentimes in the King's Indian, this is played to prepare the pawn storm, but if possible, you can push the g-pawn directly, because 1, 2 times protected. Yes, so the bishop is doing a very multi-purpose job here on d7, eyeing this knight and eyeing this pawn right here. And now maybe white thought it would be too greedy to capture this pawn. After all, it is just a pawn, so instead he went here, looking to capture not just a pawn, but a rook in the corner. And now, yeah, could black capture, or do you see a good response for white in case this happened? Yes. The rook that white placed on c1 many moves ago is turning out to do a very good job here in the open c file. So maybe Gary should move his rook, or maybe he can play something even more aggressive. Rook c8, it's possible, and it's maybe even a good move, but what he played was even better. Excellent. Very, very good. Actually sacrificing yet another pawn. But accepting this sacrifice is going to be very, very dangerous. Let's take a look at what might happen if white captures this pawn. Black could capture back with an attack on this bishop. And once the bishop captures, we can suddenly see how all the pieces have a lot of space to attack. And how could you attack this bishop and simultaneously open up for another attacking piece? Yeah? True. Now you're attacking this poor bishop, and say that the bishop went back to f2. We see that the knights in combination with the queen can become a very, very dangerous duo. So here there are several good moves to choose from, one of them being to put a knight here on f4. Yeah, and which one do you prefer? Yes, the G knight makes the most sense, because then the rook can take advantage of the open G file. And yes, the rook can now go here, the queen can go here, and this is going to be a completely deadly attack, even if white managed to win the rook in the corner. So let's go back a little bit. Oh, and you had pushed g4, and now we were looking at g3. So after g3, the player here with the white pieces, he didn't dare to capture this pawn, and instead he captured the rook in the corner. And this is a little bit of a difficult position. Of course, it's possible to capture here, but Kasparov wasn't looking so much to win back material now. He was focused on playing for checkmate. And there's a certain piece, yes, he needs to get the queen involved in order to checkmate. If the queen captures here, she gets further cut off from the king side. So what should happen in order for the queen to get involved in the attack? Yes, very good. The knight would have... Are you thinking why not capture here? Well, it would be possible to capture this bishop. Then I guess white would capture with the rook. And then do you want to capture in the corner? This is definitely also a line that black could go for. Black has then sacrificed a rook to win a knight and a bishop, but white also got a pawn for it. Looks like this should be a fine position for black as well, but you know, Garry Kasparov, he was this attacking player and he really wanted to focus on checkmate. So this line definitely looks very, very promising for black. And I mean, if I had this position, I would have been perfectly happy to go into this position. But now we're looking at a Garry Kasparov game, and you know, he always wanted to find the very best move. And it turns out that the best move in this position, after the knight captured here, was to not just win a little bit of material, but to continue the attack on the white king. Exactly. By going here with the knight, protecting here, but even more important, threatening to go here with the queen, with some very, very deadly attacks on this pawn. So here, his opponent put his king in the corner. Looks a little bit funny, but now at least the bishop here is not hanging with a check. However, it can be captured. Or black could play something else. So you could capture here. You could capture here. Which of them? None of them? Queen h4, looking to checkmate. It looks very good. What do you think white had in mind? How is white going to defend this checkmate? Yes, true. Because you're absolutely correct that if white were just to push this pawn, then I doubt that you'd hesitate to just capture and checkmate in a few moves. But the bishop could drop back here. That would be a very good defensive move. So therefore, after the king moved in the corner, he did capture the bishop. Very good. And Piquet here captured back with the rook. And now I need you to go in full Garry Kasparov mode. Seeing if you can maybe sacrifice. You already sacrificed a little bit actually. But can you sacrifice even more to keep the initiative? Yeah, you're not interested in the knight for now. Yes. Maybe. Oh. That is a check, so that is very interesting. It's always interesting to give a check because it so limits the options that your opponent has. Piquet here chose to move his king, but let's just see what would happen if he had accepted the sacrifice. Yeah, you want to put the queen there, but that pawn is in its way. Yes, very good. So you would capture here with an attack on the rook, and once the rook moves, this is going to be checkmate. You're doing amazing, very good. So of course, Garry Kasparov's opponent, he was a strong chess player as well. Let's just set the position up here. Knight was here, and this pawn was still here, and this rook was in the corner, and the rook was here. Yes, so after this knight check, he saw that this would lead to checkmate, so he moved his king back to g1 instead. And now, do you think that we should capture this bishop? Do you think we should capture this knight? What do you think the great Garry Kasparov played here? Queen h4 looks pretty promising, but the only thing you need to be careful about is that if you cannot checkmate, then you might end up being down a full rook. Maybe knight here. I'm actually being a little bit mean right now because I'm maybe trying to trick you a little bit. The move that he played, we have been discussing it and saying that that cannot be the move. Why would he do that? But yeah, let's take a look at what might happen if he just captures the rook, the knight in the corner, which is what he did. So, as you pointed out before, black is up in material now because black has an extra knight and an extra bishop just for the price of one rook. Of course, you might ask, what if white now captures back here? Isn't white then going to have the most material? But this is still super dangerous because you're gonna capture, almost trapping this rook. And once the rook goes back, yeah, you could maneuver your queen here to h4, going here, maybe in combination with a knight on f4. This is going to be a deadly attack as well. So after he captured the rook, let's see, there was a black knight here, here, and here. After he captured the rook in the corner, Piquet went here with his bishop, maybe trying to capture this knight to go sideways with the rook and maybe even create some escape squares for the king. Now Kasparov played a kind of funny looking move, and I would be very impressed if you could find it even with some hints, because this queen, she could go back to d8 to go here and continue the attack, but there is a shorter way for her to get involved in an attack. And we mentioned before that the dark squares were weak. So how else can she get into the dark squares than going here and here? Oh, you're pointing out some diagonal. How could she get into this diagonal? Yes, exactly. I remember when I first saw this move, I thought, what an odd looking move. He has been playing on the king side for the entire game. Why would he suddenly push a pawn over here? But you got the right idea. Piquet placed his queen on d3, and what was Kasparov's great idea here? Yes, queen a7, pinning this rook. And Piquet now pushed b5, hoping to have time to maybe push b6 as well. But Garry Kasparov, of course, didn't allow this to happen. How can he prevent this pawn from going to b6? Yes, one of them can capture. He chose to capture with the pawn. Great. Now came bishop captures b5, and now we're getting very close to the end of the game, and I really actually The next move is the last move of the game. It is a very funny looking move, but I see that your eyes were just looking at the right area. You can take some. Oh, yes. Yeah, you have all the right to be excited. That is amazing how quickly you found that. I would have taken much longer, but you simply put the knight in the corner. Do you want to make the move? Such a funny way for a chess game to end. To put the knight in the corner. The knights, they're famous for not being very good in the corners because they only control 2 squares. But this attack on the rook is so devastating, as the queen would be able to capture with a check or even the knight. And here Piquet resigned, because if he captures the knight, what would Garry Kasparov's response be? Yes. And if we count material here, we can see that white has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns. Black has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns. So black is down a pawn, but if we count the other pieces, 2 bishops for black, only 1 for white, 1 knight each, 1 rook, and 1 queen. So Kasparov here is up a bishop, and of course if white captures, the rook would be able to capture back. And Piquet here, you know that he was playing the very best chess player in the world, and he didn't want to continue playing a piece down. But I hope that you enjoyed this game. Yes. And so how safe this king turned out to be. Even if the pawns, they pushed all the way down, the king here was never in trouble. It was this king that had so much to deal with, and it turned out to be too much for Kasparov's poor opponent. Thank you so much for joining me for this lesson, and I hope you want to join me for another one. I think you did an absolutely amazing job, and I look forward to see you maybe play this opening. Great.